Hey again. Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about cognitive biases. I'm going through top 5 notorious cognitive biases today. Again, cognitive biases, much like logical fallacies, are a way that reasoning breaks down. They're things to watch for, to catch in yourself, and try to avoid, and to call out in others when that's the problem. A cognitive bias isn't like a mistake in reasoning patterns so much. It's not like this is a way we argue where things just always go wrong. Rather, it's a mistake in how we process information about the world, right? These are errors of reason that arise not from deficiencies of argumentation, but deficiencies of rationality itself, right? So we're more prone to these when we're tired or drunk or stressed or emotionally charged, right? And the just idea is, we've known for a very, very long time that, under various circumstances, people's decision and thought making processes can be unreliable, right? In systemic ways. So these are things to watch out for. Um, So first one we'll talk about is the confirmation bias, right? This is a tendency we have to look for information that confirms what we believe about the world, and rather than looking for information that disconfirms our beliefs, right? So we're much more likely to pay attention to something that supports what we want to believe or what we hope is true than we are to pay attention to things that are counter to our beliefs. This impacts our politics, right? Our social media feeds are full of, they're algorithmic generation sets of confirmation bias, right? They're providing us with information that we want to hear about the world. So they are providing us with stories and with just stories and advertising and data that supports our narratives, right? That supports the way we think about reality, or at least the way that marketers want us to think about reality. When we are going and we're doing our own research online, right? We find that article that supports exactly what we want to believe, or that news article that has our own personal political bias, and then we stop, right? We don't go find the source that says exactly the opposite or challenges our claims and go and pay attention to that. When we do hear something that is counter to our own beliefs, we dismiss it as quickly as possible. We go and we find an objection, and then we move on. We don't treat our own beliefs charitably, and we definitely don't treat our opponent's beliefs charitably, right? We have a tendency to try to preserve our own ego. And that's natural. That's just the way humanity works. But we have to always be aware of that, right? We are biased, and we will do what we can to preserve the integrity of our worldview. So when we're looking at information, we will always favor the stuff that confirms what we believe, and we will dismiss as quickly as possible the stuff that challenges it. So when we are looking at things that challenge our worldviews, we should always be more careful, right? We should try to be charitable to that stuff, because we will automatically have a tendency to dismiss it. And when we see something that supports what we believe, we should try to be a little skeptical about it, right? The prove me wrong bros, right? That you see with their booths all over campuses, right? That are like, I believe this asinine thing, prove me wrong. They're engaged in a big game of confirmation bias, right? They have a position, and then what they'll do is they'll say, give me some new information and I will dismiss it. I will rip it apart and throw it out. And what they're thinking is, and that also demonstrates that my position is more true, right? I'm more rational, I'm more careful than all these people that are coming up and giving me their arguments, because I can dismiss them so easily, right? Your new info is just more proof that I'm super smart and stuff, and your position is wrong, right? Like, that's what we're doing there. The person that goes to their doctor and says, well, I've gone and I've done my own research, and it says this. That's, again, you're looking at data in a way that supports your worldview, not in a way that's sort of impartial and unbiased. So always be careful about that. Cognitive bias 2 is the framing bias. The way in which information is presented to us changes the way we think about it, right? And this happens, like this can be all over the place, right? So, we're risk adverse in general. So here's like the classic example. We are risk adverse. We are scared of losses. So if you present something as really scary or bad, people will be more concerned about it than if you present it in terms of sort of like there's this positive change, or this just something socially that might happen, and you kind of downplay the fear, right? If we talk in terms of success rates or failures, people will weigh the information differently, right? So if a doctor comes to you and says, well, if you have this surgery, it's got a 20% success rate, we'll think about that differently than if somebody comes in and says, hey, look, this surgery has an 80% failure rate, right? You're much more likely to do a surgery that has a 20% chance of being successful than you are of one that's got an 80% chance of failing, even though like that's the same thing. Same thing with losses and gains when it comes to finance, right? If your company purchased new software and they're going to gain $1 million in sales, that's cool. But it's less motivating than if we don't purchase a software, our company is going to lose $1 million in sale, right? Even though it's the exact same number, the way we framed it changes the way people think about it. So always be aware of that, right? Is the way in which the information is being presented to you set up to make you feel a certain way? One place this happens all the time is politicians when they're generating propaganda, right? They'll use surveys or companies will do this too, right? But I mean, politics is notorious for this. The Alberta government is, definitely in the business of doing this, right? Presenting a survey in a way that's guaranteed to make people think about the answers, not in a impartial way, but in a biased way that presents the results that they want, right? What that does is it quickly allows you to generate data that ideally will support the position your company or your political party wants, rather than information that actually honestly reflects how people feel. It's a really useful way of manipulating groups of people and getting them to have views that are economically or politically useful for your organization. So be careful about framing. Dunning-Kruger effect, right? This is a fun one. This is just like the overconfidence effect. We tend to think higher of ourselves than we think of other people. We tend to overestimate our own abilities. We tend to think that we are smarter, wiser, more skilled than everybody else, right? We're not the idiot. Everybody else is. We're better drivers. Everybody on the road is a horrible driver except for me, right? That's an example of that. This is particularly worrying when it comes to science and academic stuff, right? Just because people have a tendency to think that they're better at things or more informed about things than they actually are, especially if they don't know anything about the subjects that they're talking about, right? So if you know a lot about a subject, by contrast, you tend to underestimate your competence in that subject. So this creates this really big problem. If you're talking about something that you know nothing about, or you know just a little about, you will be pretty convinced that you know everything there is to know about that subject, or that you're well informed, and you'll talk as if, oh, I know how this is, because you don't realize the complexity or the ambiguity or the vagueness, or you're just not aware of what you don't know, right? By contrast, if you're, say, like a genuine expert, if you're like a medical doctor, right, or you're a PhD in this particular thing that you're talking about, then you are aware of how little you actually do know about that subject, or how complicated it is, right? Like you talk to a cancer doctor, right? They'll never say something like, oh, this is the exact way it is, or this is the cure, because they don't really know. They'll talk in terms of probability and maybes and ahas, and they'll talk from this position of careful expertise where they really do know how little they know about the thing. This becomes a problem when we have talking head journalism and debates, right? Because often what we'll do is, in pursuit of impartiality or something like that, or being both sidisms, right? Trying to present both or all the sides of a debate, we'll get people that have very different opinions, right? So get, say, a medical doctor to talk about vaccines. We'll bring somebody on that recognizes the limitations of the science, and and then we'll bring on some person that's anti-vax that doesn't know anything about vaccines, and then you get them to talk. The one person will be very confident in their ignorance, and the other person will be an academic, right? They'll be talking from a position where they recognize the complexity and how little we as stupid monkeys actually do know. And then you get them to talk, and the person that is really ignorant about the topic will often come off as a better speaker, as more informed, and the expert will actually look like they're confused or boring or dry or don't really understand the issue, right? And so then that as an audience really quickly presents a situation where people that are underinformed often come off as and are better speakers than people that are giving you information that's more reliable. And then, as the general public trying to figure out, well, what should I believe? You can be very quickly often persuaded by people that are just making stuff up, right? A good bullshitter, a person that spends their career lying to and manipulating and making up nonsense, is a way better speaker than like a well-informed academic expert on the issue in topic, or a topic, right? And that's just true in any field. Being able to persuade people or manipulate people or convince them to believe things is itself a skill, right? It's something that people train in. Being an expert at anything is its own set of skills. So experts are not typically skilled at persuading people. Anyways, general point, Dunning-Kruger, we often overestimate how much we know. We underestimate how complex things are. We underestimate how little we know about a thing because we usually don't know, right? So we should always recognize, we should just always be aware, be humble in your knowledge, right? When you're not humble, you have a tendency to overinflate what you actually know, and you make yourself into a sucker when it comes to arguments presented by others. So be careful about that one. Availability heuristic, right? So this is where we overestimate the importance of vivid or recent events, right? This easily leads us to being distracted by the flashy, the emotional, the current, and not looking at things within like a broader context, right? It leads to us taking like a single narrative is really important, or a single data point, and ignoring broader statistics about the thing we're talking about, right? Or our personal research. I don't care what the experts say. I've done my research, so this is what I found on, this is what ChatGPT told me, or this is what I found on Google, right? So I know. I don't need to look at the scientific consensus. If they had done the research that I'd done, they would know, right? That's an availability heuristic. The one website by like a 14-year-old in their basement that you looked at tells you what reality's like, as opposed to the volumes of actual research that's been done on the topic. Or the emotionally charged or compelling story, an image is worth 1,000 words. What happened today is more salient than any ongoing issue. My current desires are more motivating than my long-term goals, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons addiction is so hard to deal with, right? How you feel today, what you want right now, is much more salient and motivating than, say, what you want eventually, or what, you hope for your life, right? It's one of the reasons we are so bad at long-term planning. So availability heuristic, we should always be careful to look at what's motivating us now in a broader picture, and to look at the evidence that's available to us now, again, in this picture of this is just one data point, no matter how emotionally powerful it is. Last one, I'm going to talk about the fundamental attribution error. We could do videos, we could do courses on this one. This is the fundamental attribution error is where you take you make the mistake of ignoring context and situation and environmental causes for behavior, and you emphasize individual characteristics, right? So we blame other people for their personality flaws. We assume the reason why others do something is because of their character, and not because of the environment or the context. By contrast, when we're talking about ourselves, we're really good at not making fundamental attribution errors, right? When I do something, I do it because of, if I do something wrong, I do it because of my environment, right? Well, I did this, I stole that because I needed the food. I had no money, right? There was no other option available to me. My family was going to be poor and die or something like that, right? But if we see somebody else doing that, well, they're a bad person, right? They're lazy or they don't respect other people's stuff. Like we look at character traits when we're talking about the other, right? And we blame them for their bad actions because of their character. For ourselves, we do bad things because of our context and our environment. And then we switch that when we're talking about good things. I do good things, or my family and friends do good things because of their character, because of our moral purity, right? Because we've been raised well, because we're good people, right? Other people do good things because they get lucky. They have environments that sort of lend them to doing good things, right? That's the fundamental attribution error, right? Tendency to focus on character trait as the cause of action as opposed to putting an action in a broader context that also equally and sometimes more so includes environmental and situational causes that are just as relevant to what actually happened. Solution here, we should always again have a bit of intellectual humility, right? We should remember that there but for the grace of the situation go I and goes everybody else. Take care.